بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم تسليم على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم أجمعين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. It's always amazing how time travels so quickly. And especially when you are enjoying things, that it goes even faster, it seems. And here we are at the last session, when it didn't feel like it was too long ago that we were just starting the retreat. Subhanallah. This is the way that things work. Subhanallah. May Allah Ta'ala that bless us to always that be people who work for the hereafter, and to that plant seeds that can then be harvested therein. Bi-idhnillahi Ta'ala. And this is the title of the final session, is Working for the Hereafter. And this is, we'll be covering chapter 5 of Hujjat al-Islam Al-Maqasid's book 13. And you can see on your outline the various points that we will be getting to, bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. And this is, in a sense, a continuation of chapter 4, which Ustad Amjad just covered, on ihsan. And it could, on one hand, aptly have been titled part 2 of his discussion of ihsan. And he frames it slightly differently. But really what he says is that if you do these things in addition to the elements of ihsan that pertain directly to the transactions which was just covered, this will lead to even higher degrees. And so these matters don't pertain necessarily directly to the transaction itself, but these are various religious duties that the one involved in commerce, the one who is earning a living, the one who has a job or any type of occupation, whatever it is that he or she does, if we bring this element in addition to the ihsan of ta'amul, of our dealings with people, then this is how we can be from the Siddiqeen, the highest degree of piety and closest to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala after the prophets and messengers. And again, the way that this works, just as when we have the Quranic breakdown of the different degrees of the soul, the nafs is ammara, the nafs that is lawama, and the nafs that is mutma'inna, and some of the ulama will extend that breakdown to 7 different types of souls, is that you tend to have a dominant place where your soul is. And then once you know that, okay, this is where I need to be, this is where you start putting in spiritual struggle. And you start to fluctuate between the two. And that fluctuation might last depending upon how much that effort that you're putting in, and a number of other factors, many of which that are outside of our hands, that last for relative periods of times depending upon the particular individual, until that your dominant state is lawama, the higher of the two, when it comes to amara. But then sometimes you slip back into amara. But then there might be times where that you continue to struggle, and you have moments where the nafs is mutma'inna in a number of different things. But then in 90% of the other things, you're still in that lawama state. You're catching yourself, but it's still a struggle. And then if you continue to put that struggle in, you'll start to have more moments where you kind of experience that mutma'inna and rarely kind of slip back into that ammar and hakada. This is the way this works. And this is why that we have to understand with absolute clarity the roadmap of where it is that we need to go, and how all of these different matters relate one to another. And there's no doubt that this is more difficult in our time because of the nature of the fragmented world that you and I have all inherited. And miskeen, the poor millennials that get the brunt of so many people's that criticisms, even more miskeen that so many of our children that are even after the generation of the millennials, and even more miskeen, all the newborns, and from what the world that they've inherited and everything that they're going to have to that deal with growing up. I mean, we were Generation X, MTV generation. This is going to date myself here, but the worst thing that you can watch on TV was Beavis and Butthead. I don't know if you guys remember that, right? There was no such thing as South Park. I remember coming back from a trip and just someone saying, hey, watch this. Look at this, what's on. And it was South Park, and I was just appalled. It was like, A'udhu billah. You turn your gaze from that immediately. And even that was now 20 years ago, right? And God knows I don't follow these things anymore. Anyhow, maybe we should have talked about this in the interactive session. There was only a few exceptions. Someone asked me the last time I saw a movie, I said Titanic, and they're like, Titanic? You must be as old as the Titanic. Yeah, dude. Anyhow. Ya Allah. Khair inshallah. But the purpose here is that this is not easy, because we are going uphill. We keep saying this. We're going against the current. To live principally in our time is not something that's easy. However, we should always remember everything starts with knowledge. And the little effort that we put in to go against the grain, and in whatever little way that we can go against the grain, and not just do what everyone else is doing because it's convenient, is worthy and heavy in the scales with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And little things make a big difference. And our teachers famously tell the story where there was a qati' al-tariq, which is literally a brigand, that someone used to rob caravans at gunpoint. Well, no guns back then, with weapons. And there was one of the righteous in one of these caravans, and when the caravan was being robbed, that someone found some juice in one of the saddlebags. And one of the brigands looks over at the head brigand and says, do you want some juice? And he says, no, I'm fasting. And the righteous man who's a part of the caravan looked over and be like, you're fasting? And you're robbing a caravan. If you get caught doing this, the penal punishment is that you're crucified and your alternate hands and legs are cut off because of the harm that you're doing. This is serious stuff. But he's fasting. And the brigand looks at him and says that I wanted to leave a door open between me and Allah. And years later, that righteous man is circumambulating the Kaaba. And he looks over and he sees the brigand. He says, you're here? What are you doing here? And he said that I left the door open between me and Allah, and Allah let me in. He left something. And I remember Sheikh Hamza telling this story, and it's such a beautiful story, where there was a lady who was working for one of these airlines in first class, and oftentimes they would have to serve alcohol to some of the people on the plane. And Sheikh Hamza was speaking to her and saying, this isn't something good, you maybe shouldn't do this and so forth. And she said, I really hate having to do it. And every time I do it, I serve it with my left hand, because she knew it was dishonorable and she shouldn't be doing it. And she said, in Ramadan, I have another flight attendant who's not Muslim do it. And the point is that there's a fiqh issue to that. We're not getting into the fiqh of it. But just little things like that, little steps that we take, little things that we do, doors that we keep open between us and Allah, trying to go against the grain. When everybody else is cheating, we refuse. When everyone else is embellishing their CVs, we're honest. When everyone else is doing all of these other things, no, we refuse to do that. And in the end, you will always win if that's the case. And so that, I appreciate also Amjad's comments beginning his session, and that I wanted to also add this dimension to it so we can understand this very precious material that we are learning, which it's not enough for us to just hear it in one go over the weekend and never engage it again. We really need to go deeper and continually come back to it. And when it comes to books like the Ihya al-Ulumuddin, we should have a regular reading of them or of their more accessible abridgments. So anyhow, this session 8, in a sense, is a continuation of the session on Ihsan, and can be conceived of that how to have further degrees of ihsan in very general ways when we're earning a living. And so he titles it Al-Bab al-Khamis fi Shafaqat al-Tajiri ala dinihi fima yakhussuhu wa yu'ummu akhirata. On the earners, the tajir, the one who is involved in commerce or any type of lawful job, showing concern for his religion with respect to what is particular to him and what pervades his afterlife. This is how he frames it. Shafaqat al-tajir ala dinihi. In other words, is that really the mercy that we show to our own soul. In other words, is that one of the first categories of believers is the ladam li nafsihi. Now the beautiful thing here is that when Allah Ta'ala says, ثُمَّ أَوْرَثْنَا الْكِتَابَ الَّذِينَ اصْطَفَيْنَا مِنْ إِبَادِنَا, is that then we bequeath the book to those that we have selected and chosen from our servants. Now Allah mentions three categories. The first is the ladam li nafsihi. فَمِنْهُمْ ظَالِمٌ لِنَفْسِهِ وَمِنْهُمْ مُقْتَصِدٌ وَمِنْهُمْ سَابِقٌ بِالْخَيْرَاتِ. But we find in numerous hadith of our Prophet ﷺ, an explanation of this Quranic verse. But in one narration, the Prophet said, all of them are from my ummah. So even the zalim li nafsihi, the one who has literally oppressed his own soul because he's fallen short in terms of what was possible. The one who has shafaqa ala nafsihi, who is merciful to his own soul, it's the opposite. This is the one who allows the soul to reach its potential, which is incredible, what it is that we can attain as human beings from the bounty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And what Imam Al-Azadi is going to do for us is to articulate so that we can know what to do and to put into practice exactly how to achieve that. So he says here, it does not behoove the merchant to be occupied with their livelihood at the expense of their life to come. So this is reminiscent of how he started his book, talking about the three categories. And lest they should squander their lives away and suffer a bad bargain. He's using that language of business. What he loses of profits in the afterlife cannot be compensated by what he gains from the world. And he will be among those who buy the worldly life. And he will be among those who buy the worldly life at the expense of the hereafter. Rather, the intelligent one is one who, what? Shows concern for his soul. And by preserving his capital. And his capital is his religion and his commerce in it. Okay, so this is the capital. It's hard to make money in trade if you don't have money. The more money that you have to then buy more merchandise and products, if we think of it just simply as commerce, the more ability that you'll then have to make profit. But you need to always preserve your capital. But our ratsul mal, our capital, is our deen. And in other books, that Imam Al-Ghazali says that our ratsul mal is our time. Every single one of us has a limited number of breaths that we will take on earth. A limited set number. Once we take our last breath that has been written, the soul's going to go. And we don't know. Do we have 1,100 breaths left? Do we have 3,455,000,000,000? We don't know how many breaths we have left. And that we have a limited amount of breath. So, is that then he goes on to quote Sayyidina Mu'adh ibn Jabal, the great Sahaba, that our Prophet said about him that he was the most knowledgeable of the halal and the haram. He said this in his wasiyah and his advice. And this is something that, as a side point, you and I should really want to think about. As our children get older, and you and I could go at any moment, and all of us who have children, it's a really good idea to write a wasiyah for them. Not wasiyah in the meaning of bequest in the legal sense. Wasiyah in the meaning of parting advice. So that if our lives are taken, that There's certain things that we know about our children that no one else knows. Certain things that we want to advise them on that no one else is going to really know. It's a very beautiful genre of that Islamic literature, if you will, and that because it's so intimate. And we have so many examples of this, of ulama that left behind that pieces of advice for specific people. It could have been for their students, or it could have been for their family members and so forth. And then many people benefit generally. But we should all really think about this. And just imagine that if your children have this, if Allah takes your life, and they know, whatever you do, hang on to this, 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 this. And you list for them a number of things. You could write it in different ways, but this is something that we all might want to think about, or rather should really think about if we have children, especially. And so this is what Sayyidina Mu'adh bin Jabal said. إِنَّهُ لَا بُدْ لَكَ مِنْ نَصِيبَكَ فِي الدُّنْيَا. It is essential for you to have your portion of this world. Okay, you have to have your portion of this world. We all have to have some form of livelihood. That's a given. وَأَنْتَ إِلَى نَصِيبِكَ مِنَ الْآخِرَةِ أَحْوَجِ. Though you are more in need of your portion of the afterlife. فَابْدَأْ بِنَصِيبَكَ مِنَ الْآخِرَةِ فَخُذْهُ. Begin with your portion of the afterlife and take it. فَإِنَّكَ سَتَمُرَّ عَلَى نَصِيبَكَ مِنَ الدُّنْيَا فَتَنْتَظِمُهُ. Indeed, you shall pass by your portion of the world and you shall orchestrate it. This is great advice. And so if you think about how we could put this into practice, you and I should really sit down and think about what we need to do for deen. What we need to do for deen. And plan it out. This is the time that I'm going to give to deen on a daily basis. I'm putting the phone away. I'm not going to respond to texts or emails. This is for deen. And he's going to say here that there should be time in the morning and time in the evening. And then also, during the week, there should be set time for the hereafter. If we can structure it such that that day is Friday, that's best. If you have flexibility with your schedule and you can make your work week such that you have Friday off and you can devote that to the hereafter if possible, or work less and then work a little bit more on Saturday and Sunday, that's better, if possible. If not, you still do what it is that you can on Friday. That in general, even though it's permissible, it's not like a Sabbath like it was in previous religious dispensations where it's impermissible to work. It's only impermissible to work once the second adhan is called. But up until the first adhan, then it becomes makruh. Then once the second adhan is called, then it becomes haram to engage in any transactions, because Allah Ta'ala says, فَاسْعُوا إِلَى ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ. That rush to the remembrance of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, which indicates the importance of the khutbah, because Allah Ta'ala says that this is the remembrance of Allah. It takes the place of 2 of those rak'ahs that we normally would have prayed for Salat al-Dhuhr. So we want to put that first, portion out our vacation time, what it is that we do outside of work, and make the hereafter a priority for our own selves, for the sake of our children, and being careful to be sucked into what everybody else is doing. And one of those things, even though on one hand, that after-school sports and activities are very helpful because it keeps kids out of trouble, but you got to protect it from getting away from yourself. And that just dedicating yourself to one season is a pretty serious commitment, let alone if they start getting into that other leagues and things like that where you end up having no more time for anything else. I'm not saying that we don't do those things. In general, I highly encourage us to get our kids involved in sports. But we want to be balanced. You want to make sure that the portion of the hereafter is set first and foremost. And one of the most oft misunderstood verses is the verse where Allah Ta'ala says, وَلَا تَنْسَى نَصِيبَكَ مِنَ الدُّنْيَا. That the verse begins by saying where Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala says, وَابْتَغِي فِيمَا آتَاكَ اللَّهُ. Right? So that seek from that which Allah Ta'ala has given you the abode of the hereafter. وَلَا تَنْسَى نَصِيبَكَ مِنَ الدُّنْيَا. Don't forget your portion of the hereafter. So one of those meanings is, in other words, is that focus on the hereafter, but don't forget your portion of the hereafter. That's one interpretation. But even another interpretation that shows you how off people are when they quote this verse is, as it says here in Yahya, لا تنسى في الدنيا نصيبك منها للآخرة. Don't forget your portion of time that you spend in the world that you invest in the hereafter. فإنها مزرعة الآخرة, because it's a seedbed of the hereafter, because in it is when we do our good deeds. As if that we have to remind the vast majority of Muslims to not forget their portion of the world. I think if we're honest with ourselves in our context of especially the United States of America, and I think our little brother, the Canadians to the north, are probably in a similar situation. Most of everyone else in the Western world, usually it's the opposite, is that I don't think the worry is, for the most part, for getting their nasib in the dunya, except with maybe the millennials and the new generation, which is a different story. But in general, this is the balance. Set your affairs right so that you have things that you do for the hereafter, and you have time that you spend earning a living with noble intentions, as we will get to, and then you will maximize your reward. So then he goes on to say, وَإِنَّمَا تَتِمُّ الشَّفَقَةُ تَجْعَلَ دِينِ بِمُرَاعَةِ سَبْعَةِ أُمُورٍ. The merchant's concern for his religion is only fully realized by taking care of 7 matters. So the first bullet point was about having desire for the hereafter dominate the heart. This is what the essence of what this is about. So not just having ihsan in everything is that we do, all of our dealings. He spoke about that. But now even further, having the desire of the hereafter dominate the heart. And when it dominates the heart, the decisions that we make change. And these 7 things are the religious duties that are on one hand a sign that the hereafter has dominated the heart, but they're also the path to that. And so he says here, the first one is husn niyati, having a good intention, wal aqidah, and a conviction at the beginning of tijara, of a commercial undertaking. And he goes on to list several intentions that it is that we can make. And I'm just going to go through those, and then adding it to what some of the other ulama have said, that will summarize them. So he says the first matter in making a good intention is to abstain from asking people, and to restrain yourself from coveting what's in their hands by being independent through one's permissible earning. Number 2, well, he doesn't number them, but actually won't number them. We'll just go through it, and then I'm going to number them after. To assist in one's observance of religion through what he earns. Look at that. It's very difficult to perform Umrah, or to perform Hajj, or to come to a program, and to travel somewhere to meet people of knowledge, or to go to, if you don't have money. So that from the money that you make, that it helps you observe your religion. It gives you the flexibility to do what it is that you need to do. This is a pious intention to make. You know, we're in the process right now of preparing for the Umrah trip in the fall, and unfortunately the prices are just gone way up. You wish that you could make it so accessible for people. But now, unfortunately, when people see these prices, they're going to think like, oh, these people are getting over. And you're not getting over. You're bound by the prices that they tell you. And it's unfortunate because it makes it difficult for people to go to the Holy Lands. And then the next one is, and to provide adequately for one's dependents, and thereby becoming among those who strive in the path of Allah through His commerce. So you and I should know through the study of fiqh, who are we required to support? And there might be some slight scholarly difference there based upon the school of thought that we follow. But in general, is that you could think of it as that your parents and above, and your children and below. That most important, your immediate family. your own children, which is obvious, but your parents. And then one should also intend to give good counsel, nusih, yani nasiha, to the Muslims, to desire for the rest of creation what one desires for oneself. So we see this theme keep coming up. We've talked about this in multiple sessions. We've talked about this in the interactive session because this is right at the heart of, which is what should be at the heart of all of our transactions and dealings. And we should also intend to follow the path of justice and ihsan, excellence, as we have elaborated, and to command and to intend to command what is right and wrong in whatever he sees in the market. That's an amazing intention. Is that oftentimes we think of ourselves of having our backs up against the wall. One of our intentions should be, if we see people lying at work, that's not cool. If we see people backbiting at work, just set the tone from the beginning. Look, I don't talk bad about people. Why are we so like, oh my God, what are they going to think about me? They're going to think I'm so strange. And they tell me, look, I don't drink, right? I don't drink. I'm not going to happy hour with you. I don't drink. Just be confident about your deen. Don't be open about. And if they think that you're square and weird or awkward, that's their problem. And as they go through all of their problems, guess what? Subtly, they're likely to envy you, which we should never envy anyone. But in the end, you would be surprised how people that might even make fun of you really wish they could have what you have. And I can tell you this with a high degree of certainty because I've seen it within my own family, where at first people are saying whatever it is that they're saying, but then as they go through their divorces and they go through their problems and they go through all these other types of things, and if they see stability in you, they wish they could have had that. And there is a lot of people that very subtly envy what Muslims are able to do, that they have lost with their tradition. And in their mind, it might just be too hard for them to cross the Rubicon and to outwardly enter into Islam, which it would be better for them to have courage to do so. But the point here is that don't give up on your principles. Make that intention that if you see wrong, say something about it. And just set it clear from the beginning. Even if it means that people say this or that about you. No, just set it clear from the beginning. So then we can summarize this if we add some of the other intentions that other ulama mention. So these are some of the intentions we can make in earning a living. To not be in need of people. And closely related to that, to be self-sufficient. To prevent ourselves from needing to ask others. To fulfill the duty of providing for family and children. To maintain ties of maternal kinship by assisting them. To give charity and assist those in need. To learn patience and tolerance with people. Because you're going to need this if you deal with people. To fulfill a communal obligation, which is coming. To assist in providing the needs of Muslims and other people. To follow the path of justice and excellence in dealings. To enjoying good and forbidding evil while working. To use the earnings in the service of the religion. And to love for all Muslims what you love for yourself. That's 13 intentions. So just think, if you make all of those intentions, your whole work life has now changed from something that drags you down and tires you out and is considered to be a part of the dunya to something that's for the hereafter. You've now changed your intention. And this is the first step. First step is knowledge. The second step is intention. And it might be a little bit dramatic for us to make major career shifts too quickly. But at least we can all make these intentions right now for any line of work that we do. And then again, if we're in that area where we're doing a type of work that is prohibited or not good, make the intention to get out of it, to get into a situation where there's something that is less harmful or not as bad. And then move eventually towards what is permissible. And then eventually move towards what is recommended and praiseworthy. وهكذا. And this gives us a very practical way of changing how it is that we approach our career. So the first step towards this higher degree of closeness to Allah Ta'ala, and in general, is to change our intention. And he says, these are the words of Imam Ghazali, if one internalizes into one's heart these convictions and intentions. So notice here he uses the word conviction. Normally he uses the word intention to speak about these things, but here he uses conviction. This is your i'tiqad. Then what happens? Then one is working on the path to the hereafter, and in the process, one should acquire some wealth, then that's good. And even if one should suffer some loss in the world, he would nevertheless gain profit in the hereafter. So in other words, if you make these intentions, even if you lose your job, even if you're not successful in your tijara, in reality you're successful. Do you see how it's impossible really to be healthy without deen, without religion? You can't really be healthy in all meanings of the word healthy if you include especially the spiritual dimension, which really then that impacts every other that dimension after it, without religion. Look at what deen does for you. It gives you the sa'ada and the felicity of this world and the hereafter. Even if you fail because of what you could call here a growth mindset that is rooted in belief in Allah, in deep belief in the hereafter, that even though something doesn't transpire the way that you want it now here in this world, the hereafter is going to be different. What an empowering belief. And think about how much psychological stress you're spared by that degree of conviction. Our problem is our faith is weak. Our yaqeen is there, but it needs to be strengthened. So this is number one, intention. Make a righteous intention in making righteous intentions in the beginning. The second is to make the intention through one's craft, commerce, or work. So whatever one's job is, to fulfill one of the fard kifayas. One of the fard kifayas. And I can't remember if this is a side conversation or in a session. This is an incredibly beautiful word, fard kifaya. And the word kifaya connotes in this context the meaning of sin being alleviated from a group of people who could have fulfilled that but didn't. But it also has the meaning of sufficiency. In other words, is that our deen that pushes us as individuals, as communities, as an ummah, to be self-sufficient. Now, we all know there, when we talk about the nature of the very complex, interconnected world, is that Muslim countries, unfortunately, are some of the most dependent countries of all, as well as other types of countries that have been colonized for the past several hundred years. And there's only so much that we can do at that level, but you and I can at least, at the level of our conception, understand that this is something that's important and try in very small ways to do what it is that we can. And even really small things, like if you know that there's two restaurants, even if the food tastes a little bit better at someone else's restaurant, to support your brother. Is that if there's contractors, that even if okay, someone might do a little bit better work, but support your Muslim brothers. Unfortunately, people end up having bad experiences, and you even hear people say, I'm not working with the Muslims anymore. It's just so much easier to work with these people, right? Yani, we have to be careful with saying those types of things, and that if we uphold our principles, hopefully that won't be the case. But fulfilling one of the fard kifayas. So what does he say here? The crafts and the various types of business, if they should be abandoned, the livelihoods of people would be disrupted and most people would perish as a consequence. Therefore, the well-ordering of the affairs of all is realized through the cooperation of all, while each group assumes an occupation. If all of them were to be devoted to a single vocation, then the rest of the vocations would be left unattended and people would be destroyed. And then he goes on to say, which is a very interesting point, is in light of this reality that some of the scholars have interpreted the saying of the Prophet ﷺ, the diversity of my community is a mercy, اختلاف أمتي رحمة, as referring to the diversity of their occupations and the various crafts and vocations. We usually only hear the interpretation of that in a legal sense. And of the crafts, those are which are important, and those are which can be done without because they have to do with the seeking of comforts. Hence, one should be occupied with an important vocation so that by practicing it, he takes care of something of concern in the religion for Muslims. Now, that here we can cross-reference something that Imam Ghazali mentions in book 1 of the Yahya. And he has a whole section on that which is fard kifaya. And this is really, really beautiful and really, really important. And I wanted to just read this without going into too much detail because we have still quite a bit of material to cover. But this has to become a staple part of how it is that we approach what it is that we do. And I really hope that we can put this knowledge into practice, put it into practice, and if you will, operationalize it. I hope there will be some people that are inspired, that you know how they have it like at universities and now even in high schools, like career training, where they walk people through that what you can do with your degree and all these type, that we need a Muslim version of that. And right at the heart of the theory of that has to be this concept of fard kifaya, letting people know various options that they have. And one of the things that we also want to do right after I read this is just look at the difference of opinion amongst the ulama about what was the very best way to make money. Afdal al-Maqasid. What is the best way to make money? And you'll see how there's such a difference in the way people view this in our time. And part of recapturing this is, again, going against the grain. Where even though things might be a certain way in society, is that we, maybe be even with our own children, have the courage of not limiting them to think that if you do not get a college degree from such and such a university, you're going to starve and die of hunger, right? That, you know, even though statistics might point that if you get a college degree, you're likelier to get that these are things that we really seriously want to consider. And I'm not saying I'm necessarily against going to college. My own daughter's in college right now as I speak. So these are things we want to think about, though. So he says here, communal obligations include every form of knowledge that is indispensable. So keep in mind, he's speaking about this in book 1, which is the book on knowledge. So it means by the knowledge of, but also practice, of course. Includes every form of knowledge that is indispensable to the establishment of the affairs of this world. Right? Do you see how vast that is? He goes on to talk about, in book 1, this incredible details of all of the different professions that are needed for society. And we're not going to get into that. But here he summarizes as such. Every form of knowledge that is indispensable to the establishment of the affairs of this world. And he says, it includes disciplines such as medicine, it's a fard kifaya, and mathematics, which is necessary for financial transactions, and the divisions of wealth in which wills and inheritance and other needs are involved. And he says, should a region be without someone who practices these disciplines, the people of that region will fall into straitened circumstances. But should there be at least one individual established in that discipline, it would suffice in the obligatory nature of having someone in that knowledgeable, in that discipline will be lifted from the remainder of the community. So he's preempting that there might be some ulama that want to limit the conception of fard kifaya to just the religious sciences. And he says, one should not be astonished by our saying, medicine and mathematics are among the obligations of the community. For the foundational crafts are also communal obligations, such as agriculture, the manufacture of cloth, and tailoring, and governance, even cupping. Even cupping. For were a region to be void of one who practices cupping, devastation would overtake its residents, and then they would become anxious at being exposed to this devastation. For he who sent down the affliction sent down the remedy, provided instructions for its application, and provided the means to practice it. It is therefore forbidden to expose oneself to devastation by neglecting it. We're talking about forbidden, haram, shar'an. These are big words. It's to this degree, it's this expansive. And again, there is a long list of careers, of jobs, of crafts, of professions that fall underneath this. And then he goes into a further study, but what we need to do is we need to bring this out further and understand in our day and age, where do all of the different types of jobs that people do fit into this? Okay? And just because something is not a fard kifaya doesn't mean that it's not permissible. There still could be a job that's permissible. But what we're saying is it's better if someone, when they're thinking about their career track, they could be doing something that is of general benefit because it is considered to be a communal obligation. Because then guess what? When you go out to work then, you're not just getting the reward for a fard of self-sufficiency in providing for your family, which, if you think about that, look at what intention does. That 9 hours you spend at work is that now it's transformed into 9 hours of fulfilling an obligatory act which weigh the heaviest in the scales. And if you add to that a second intention to fulfill a fard kifaya, you're getting a second reward for an obligation all 9 hours or whatever it is that you spend at work. And then if you add more intentions like the ones that we made, you get all of those other rewards. In other words, your work then changes simply by making an intention, and now it is a part of your work for the hereafter. So you see how we have to get out of this deen and dunya dichotomy? Yes, don't, and Imam is going to get to this, don't let the dunya overcome you. And that's very easy to say, very hard to happen, because we know it's stressful to own your own company, to worry about market trends, to be in corporate America, to worry about what's going to happen next, losing your job. Everything's tied to that, your house payments, this and that, insurance. If you lose this is all these things cause us to worry. But at the heart of it, when you frame it like this, you will definitely be better off. So this is huge. And that's all we're going to say now. And we have to come back to this as a community. And ideally, we want to see this operationalized where young people are encouraged to know what is possible for them to do based upon a religious vision, not based upon a people primarily whom came to this country or live in this country and have economic happiness in mind with a deep-seated inferiority complex. Excuse me for being insensitive in saying that. Is that can't be at the heart of our vision for the future in a country like the United States of America or anywhere that Islam spreads. It has to be governed and guided by the religion. And we have to go against the grain, even if it makes all other community members around us panicking, right? Even if it means that people almost console us as we lost a loved one when we make our career choice, right? Even if people that look down upon us because it's something related to manual labor, right? And the only people that do that are the dumb people. The only people who do that are so these are really serious things that we are, I mean, you don't have to look far. It's been spoken about so many times, you don't even need to mention it. But look at the way the Muslim world is set up. And that the standardized tests and where people go based upon their standardized tests. And it doesn't mean that we don't want to go in the reverse and to start lambasting the doctors and the engineers and the lawyers. Those are fard kifaya professions, and they're noble, and especially medicine is noble. But we need to put everything in its proper place. And at the same time, when we talk about the afdal al-makasib, is that the afdal al-makasib, according to the ulama, there's a difference of opinion. but they're between three. And it's between a zira'a, a sina'a, and a tijara. Zira'a is agriculture. Sina'a are like crafts. And tijara is commerce. And according to Imam Shafi, tijara. According to Imam Abu Hanifa, it was tijara. According to that other scholars, it was zira'a. And the later Shafi scholars agreed that zira'a, agriculture, was the best way to earn a living. And then the scholars look into detail there and say really it differs based upon the different needs of people and the different states of people. But these are considered to be, this in general, the three best ways to earn a living. Either through agriculture, either through some type of craft, which means that you're something that you do with your hand, right? You're a tailor, you're a shoemaker, or tijara. You sell a commodity that people need. And the closer you are to that selling something what people really need, and again, Imam Ghazali mentioned being careful when it comes to foodstuffs, is that you want to be careful to that disprivilege people from buying things that they need by raising prices too high. But in general, the closer you are to dealing with what people need, the better. And this is why there's a statement that says that the people before us, they deemed it commendable to trade in textiles. Sa'id ibn Musayyib said, there is no trade more appealing to me than trading in textiles, i.e. cloth, clothing. Everybody needs clothing. So again, there's a lot of challenges to this. I understand the nature of the clothing. This does not mean that you sell much of the type of clothing that now people are selling out there or wearing. So there's different levels to all of this. But the point here is that, do you see the importance of how we have to reframe things? And that our dear brother Imam Tom mentioned yesterday, something that I felt was just really important, is that what we're really trying to do at this most basic level is to challenge ourselves to that undertake this moral framework, is that this is what we want to commit to. And the more that we know this and believe it and live by it, the more that things are going to change on the ground. Little by little, step by step, day after day. So this is huge. And again, there's a lot of work that we have to do here. And that this is part of the work that our dear brothers from that Islamic Gift Academy, Dr. Adi and Sid Ramis, are doing. And that we need to further this, so that this is the understanding that a young Muslim has when they're at a workable age. They got it. They understand all of this. This is crystal clear. They're not left in the dark or just coming to a retreat after they've been working for some company 10 years and trying to work it out then. No, we should get this, that it should be instilled in the heart that from the time they're at a workable age, from the time that we're encouraging them to get jobs at age 14 and 15, and then small jobs here and there at 16 and 17, and so forth. So we'll leave it at that, although there's a lot more that you want to say on this. And there's this beautiful hadith in the narration of collection Al-Kabir of Al-Tabarani. لو أذن الله لأهل الجنة في التجارة لاتجروا في البز والإطر. And this translates as that we're allowed to permit the people of paradise in tijara, to engage in commerce. They would have that transacted in that textiles and in perfume. But the people of paradise don't need to have tijara. Is that there they have the secret of kun fayakun. Allah gives that to them. In the world that we don't have kun fayakun. Allah says be to it, and it is. In the world, if we want something, you have will that you have to work to get it. You don't even know if you're going to get it. And the hereafter, Allah Ta'ala gives us that. If you want something, it appears. So that if you just see a bird flying by, you're like, that would be tasty, right? Boom. It's right before you. Anything that you want, khalas. Lahum ma yasha'un. They have everything by the power of Allah. They're not creating anything, but they want something, and it is from the bounty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what He gives them in the hereafter. So He gives us, this is again point number 2, that most of the occupations of the select of the predecessors were in tin crafts. Now, these are examples, and this is the work that we need to do for our time. There's precedence for certain types of trades, which might not be as easy in our time, but the point here is that these are examples, and we need to do the same thing. Where are the places that people should go? If you are going to go into medicine, what do you want to be wary? If you are going to go into law, what are some of the types of law that you want to avoid? What are some of the types of law that are better for you to do? If you're going to go into business, you're going to go into corporate, what are some of the considerations that you want? We need to clarify this for people so that they're not just groping and trying to figure it out themselves. So what are the 10? Leather stitching, commerce, portaging, hamal, yani carrying things for people, tailoring, shoemaking, bleaching, like with clothes, making pumice stones, amal al-khafaf. I'd have to look that one. I'm not sure what that one is. Ironsmithing, okay, spinning, that hunting, and book copying. And this is what they say. The predecessors disliked taking payment for anything that pertains to the worship rituals and the obligations of sufficiency, such as ritual washing of the deceased in their burial, and likewise the call to prayer in the Tarawih prayer, even though they ruled for the validity of taking payment for them, because anything that's directly related to the deen, in that closely related to the deen, you have to be very careful. And likewise the teaching of the Quran and the teaching of the science of the revealed law. For these are works whose right is that one trades in them for the sake of the afterlife, whereas taking payment for them is substituting the world for the afterlife, and that is not something to be desired. So, if someone wants to be a teacher, then you just have to be content with getting by. And the standard is that of Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, who he actually, after becoming the caliph, went out the next morning to the marketplace. And they told him that you have to free yourself up. Ustad Amjad covered this in his session on Friday night. And it's not possible if you just spend your time. No, we need you to focus on the affairs of the believers. So he took a stipend. But then, after he passed away, he wrote in his will that it be returned. So thank you, Ustad Amjad. A pumice stone can be used to remove the dead skin from a callus or corn. All right. So something of practical benefit like that. So he returned it. And this is when Sayyidina Umar said that لَقَدْ أَتْعَبْتَ مَنْ بَعْدَكَ يَا أَبَا بَكْرٍ, is that you've made things difficult for those who come after you. How can you live up to this standard of principle? And Sayyidina Umar followed the same standards. Where is that his wife was saving a little bit of money, and then bought some sweets. And Sayyidina Umar comes and asks about it. And she said that I gathered money for a period of time. He said, then I'm taking too much from the Bayt al-Mal. Right? SubhanAllah. And this is the way these people were. They realized in the nature of this work there has to be sacrifice. When the righteous caliph Sayyidina Umar bin Abdul Aziz became the caliph, he had more than one spouse. And he said to them that I'm giving you the permission. I am not going to be able to fulfill your rights. And specifically he meant by that relation. So you have a choice. Is that you all can go your way or you can remain with me. But I'm letting you know now the rights of the believers are going to take precedence. And people that work in this realm, their families have to realize this. If you're going to get into this, is that it's a struggle. It's a sacrifice. And it's the greatest sacrifice that can be made. And it doesn't mean that you still don't put things in their proper place and give it. You have to be balanced, of course. But when it comes to religion, it's different. We don't make money off of religion. It cannot be commercialized. If there's, and we see this happening before our eyes, the Protestantization of Islam, this is dangerous to the highest possible degree. And what it's going to lead to, it's going to lead people hearing what sounds so good and flashy and appealing, but it's going to go in one ear and right out the other. As so many of us in this room that were raised Episcopalian or were raised Protestant or Catholic and weren't impacted by the teachings because they had been so watered down, and there's a number of complicated reasons for that, but this is what struck the vast majority of converts that I know, is just how real Islam is. This is a deen that has maintained its integrity, and it's real, and it challenges you to that go against the grain and to make conscious decisions to do what is right, even if everybody around you is doing something different. So the third matter here is what? That the market of the world, the suq ad-dunya, does not hinder you from the market of the hereafter. And the markets of the afterlife are the mosques. And by extension, you could say religious spaces, places where Allah is worshipped, places where you learn the religion, being with good people. And he quotes the verse, رِجَالٌ لَا تُلْهِيهِمْ تِجَارَةٌ وَلَا بَيْعٌ عَنْ ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ. They are men who neither commerce nor sale can divert them from the remembrance of Allah. Notice he didn't say here that prevent them from engaging in commerce or sale or business. No, that they engage in commerce, they engage in buying and selling, but they're not preoccupied. They're not diverted from it. رِجَالٌ لَا تُلْهِيهِمْ تِجَارَةٌ عَنْ ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ وَإِقَامَ الصَّلَاةِ وَإِيتَاءِ الزَّكَاةِ. In observing the prayer and giving of obligatory alms. So what do we learn here in this verse? Is that when we're engaged in tijara or bay', whatever job that it is that we have, this is what we want to be cognizant of. We should be people of dhikr. And this is one of the 7 that's coming. Establish the prayer and to make sure to pay our zakat. Hence, it behooves one to render the period between the early part of the day until the time of his entry into the market for his afterlife. And so he should frequent the mosque at that time and devote himself assiduously to reciting the litanies al-awrad. So not everybody has the luxury of doing that. Some people have a long commute. Some people have to leave very early. But in general, the more that you and I can make the first part of the day for the hereafter. But what does that mean? Especially as we get to the summer months, we have to make sure we get to bed on time so that we can actually get up. And if you just look at any community, how many people come to Isha prayer? Oftentimes many more than those that come to Fajr prayer. Fajr prayer seems just to be a few people here and there. And if we all live within a few minutes on the mosque, and excuse me, I'm coming down on local community now, and we can't get up for Salat al-Fajr and pray in Jama'ah, what in God's name can you ever expect that you want to do in the future of Islam in this country? What do you think we're ever going to be able to do? If we can't even get people to prayer for Fajr and Isha, when we live within a few minutes of the masjid, we have serious problems. And we're going to be bound in that there's not a lot of khair that's going to come from us. That's a given. And that's a given, and there's a long list of other things that we need to be doing. But if we can't even do that, what else do we expect that we can do? This is serious. This is serious. It's not a joke. If we need to be soldiers of this religion. This is what our teachers ingrain in us. This work is not going to happen. Do you think we're really going to bring Islam to our people by just babbling up here like parrots and talking about these lofty ideals and these great ideas? It's ridiculous. It's not going to happen. Truth is spread with sacrifice until we're willing to die for this religion and give everything for this religion. That is how this religion is going to be established. And I'm not making any claims. I'm the worst of all of you. But I know the people who came before us, and I know our teachers, and I know what they were willing to sacrifice. And I know how many of them were martyred, and I know how many of them gave everything for this religion. These are the people that Allah Ta'ala is going to establish this religion in the hearts of people on their hands, not people that just talk. It's not about talk. Talk is cheap. We need to be people of action and to put this religion into practice in a very real way. When we talk about principles of ihsan and our interactions with each other, it's not just about talking about it in the moment in a very real way. If someone does something to offend you and you know what it is that you should do it. And our teachers used to say this, the majalis there's an amana, there's a trust in them. And the trust is that there are corresponding sifat, traits that we're supposed to have by being privileged to sit in those majalis with these great shuyukh. And if we don't assume those traits, the least you could say is that we're falling extremely short. If we're serious about this matter, which we all should be, our people need this religion. We need this religion. Our children need this religion. But it's going to be established through sacrifice. There's no other way. And yes, I don't mean that we have an approach where we all burn out in one day. No, it's a long process. But there's little things that there's no excuse for at all. And we're not going to get far if we don't have some of these things in place. And we're still going to be gentle and merciful and loving and smile, and that hope the best for everyone and try to push people with ihsan forward and to gently that drive people in the right direction. All of us are like this, but the point is that we have to really be serious about this. Anyhow, Sayyidina Umar said that render the early portion of your day for the afterlife, and what comes afterwards for your world. The devout of the predecessors would render the early and late part of their day for the afterlife, and the middle part for commerce. And then in a hadith, the angels, when they ascend with the register, the sahifa of the servant, and wherein in the beginning and end of the day is the mention of Allah and goodness, Allah will efface from him what is between that of bad deeds. In other words, that if you give a portion of your day to Allah in the beginning and a portion of your day to Allah in the end of the day, Allah will suffice you and atone for what takes place in between. But then on top of that, when he hears the call to prayer for the first prayer and thereafter for the Asr prayer, he should not remain engrossed in his occupation, but be roused from his place and abandon everything with the prayer leader at the beginning of the prayer time. And that this cannot be compensated by this world and all that it contains. Now, this is assuming that someone's in a traditional marketplace, whereas it's a congregational prayer. But if you're at work, make prayer a priority. If you can schedule a meeting 15 minutes later so that you can pray in the beginning of the time, do it. If for some reason you can't, then pray as soon as you can. If you can pray in congregation at work, do it. But make prayer a priority at work, however it is that you have to do that. And he says here, and he's coming down hard on us, this is now Imam Ghazali getting Jalali. If he fails to attend the prayer of congregation, then he has disobeyed Allah, according to some scholars. This is actually some opinion, is that it's not fard kifayah, it's fard ayn. But that's not the dominant opinion, is that it's recommended. The point here is that we should make prayer a priority. The predecessors would hasten to the mosque on hearing the call to prayer and leave the markets in the care of boys and dhimmis. They would hire the boys and dhimmis for a few carrots to take care of their shops during the time of prayers. And these shops were their means of livelihood. And so in relation to the verse that was quoted, neither merchandise nor sale distracted them from the remembrance of Allah, that we have in the Sabab an-Nuzul, the occasion of revelation. It is explained that these people were ironsmiths and leather stitchers. And it said that one of them would be raising his hammer to make the next hit, or stitching his when he heard the call to prayer, without banging the hammer down or extracting the needle from the stitching spot. He would quickly arise and proceed to the prayer. So he was about to hit and he'd hear the adhan, he'd stop. He wouldn't even hit one more time. He'd just put the needle in, is about to pull it, he'd leave the needle where it was. Now it's time for prayer. Do you see this is what he's trying to teach us? And astaghfirullah, we all fall short in this, but this is why we need to be reminded. No matter what it is that we're doing, we stop. Adhan goes off, we stop. We direct ourselves to prayer. The fourth matter is that he should not limit himself to it, but rather he should constantly be in remembrance of Allah, most glorious in the market, and occupy himself with saying La ilaha illallah and saying Subhanallah, and know that the remembrance of Allah in the midst of the ghafilin, the heedless, is even more meritorious. In Bukhari, our Prophet said, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, the likeness of one who remembers Allah and the one who doesn't remember Allah is like the alive and the dead. And we know that one of the greatest hadith and merit for dhikr is the dua for entering the souk. And we should all memorize this. I'll read it, but it's easy to find. La ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika la, lahul mulk wa lahul hamd, yuhyi wa yumit, wa huwa hayyun la yamutu biyadihi al-khair, wa huwa ala kulli shay'in qadir. If you say this when you enter into the souk, and think about now that for us, the souk is not just in one spot. This is any store that you enter. This is any place that any strip mall that you go by. Say this dua. And that the reward of this is you will be given 1 million good deeds. You will have 1 million bad deeds removed from you. And you will be raised 1,000 daraja, 1 million degrees. So Imam Ghazali mentions here that Ibn Umar, Sayyidina Salim bin Abdullah, Muhammad bin Wasi, they would enter into the market with the intention just to say this dua because it had such a great merit. This was the matter of the commerce of those engaged in commerce for the sake of seeking sufficiency rather than the sake of opulent living. Number 5, the fifth matter is that one should not be overly covetous of the market in commerce. This covetous is by the first who enters the market and the last who departs. So he talks about when it is that we actually go. And he goes into details here. But the whole point here is that learning to restrain ourselves. Don't open up the door for unmitigated that just doing whatever, just restrain yourself. Know that a little amount of provision that is as blessing, barakah in it, is better than a lot of provision that does not have blessing in it. And so that not being overly covetous is that, yes, make money. It's permissible to have nice things. It's permissible to that have a lot of that wealth, but don't be overly covetous. And that opens up huge doors for us if we are, that prevents us from that achieving higher degrees of closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. His example was there were some among them who would depart from the market after the midday and some after the mid-afternoon. There were some of them who would not work except for 1 or 2 days in a week, and they would deem that to be sufficient. Now, that might not be possible for us in the way that the markets are, and the way that businesses are run, and the way that our jobs are. But let's say someone could work it out that they only had to work 4 days a week, or that the nature of their career was that they could work 3 days a week. They were able to work it out like that. That might be a decision that someone makes. Or that someone has an opportunity for a promotion where they make more significant amount of money, but they're going to be busier. It's going to require more travel. They might say, no, I want to stay where I'm at and not take that promotion. And the reason is because that this is going to be better for my religion. That I have this job opportunity moving to this place, but that's not a good place to raise children. I'm going to stay here. These are great decisions if you make them for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and take less for a religious reason. And this is a part of principled thinking. Number 6, he should not limit himself only to steering clear of what is unlawful, but should rather be wary of all of the avenues through which doubtful matters creep in. And that needs to be studied further, and that the next book that we'll be studying, the next retreat, which is not in August, it's in October, on the halal and the haram, which Imam An-Nawawi said about this book, that there's never been a book authored like it in Islam. The Kitab Halal and Haram from the Ihya, it's one of the greatest books of the Ihya al-Madin. That's the next book that we'll be taking. So to avoid all shubuhat and to have that our rizq bi-tayyib, our kas bi-tayyib, is that it not just be halal, but it also be good. And that he, in Sahih Muslim, that Allah, our Prophet said, Inna Allah ta'ala amara mu'mineen bima amara bin mursalin. Allah has commanded the believers that which He's commanded the prophets. O you who believe, that eat from the wholesome things we have provisioned for you. Naam. And then number 7, the 7th matter is that one should keep a keen eye on all avenues of one's transaction with every single one of those whom he transacts with. For he is being watched and taken into account, so that he should prepare his response on the day of accounting and penalty in respect of his every deed and word, as to why he embarked boldly on them and for what reason. La ilaha illallah. May Allah forgive us. We're in complete heedlessness. فَلْيُعِدَّ الْجَوَابِ لِيَوْمِ الْحِسَابِ. This is how we should approach life. Anything that is we do, we should bring to mind that we're being asked on Yawm al-Qiyamah about this particular matter. What is our jawab? What is our response? And we can't lie in front of Allah. We can't fool Allah. We cannot deceive Allah. If we really had a response and we really made it right, then it will be accepted from us. Ya Rab, I did this for this and this. But you see this, and this is the way the righteous were. They say that if I'm asked about this Yawm al-Qiyamah, I will say, this is why I did that. You and I should think about everything that it is that we do. And again, we all fall short in this. No claims are being made. This is how we need to be, though, and call ourselves to being. And why do we do things? And literally in your mind, Ya Rab, if I'm asked about this, this is what I'm going to, this is why I did it. If I'm asked about that, this is why I did that. As opposed to just doing something because our nafs wants to do it. Indeed, it has been said that the merchant shall be made to stand firmly on the day of resurrection with every person to whom he had sold something. And he shall be held to account fully for his dealing with every single one of them to the number of those whom he transacted with in the life of this world. One of them said, I saw one of the merchants in my sleep, so I said to him, what has Allah done with you? He said, 50,000 scrolls of accounts were unrolled for me. I said, were all these sins? He said, these were transactions with people, to the number of all persons with whom I had transacted in the world. Each person had his own individual scroll regarding everything between me and him, from the very beginning of the transaction with me until its very end. This is scary. Every person we counsel, every person we meet with, every person who we ask us for advice, every person that we have any dealing with, whether it's in the context of a commercial transaction or in the context of a meeting or a private consultation, or every single one of these situations are going to be asked about Yawm al-Qiyamah. La ilaha illallah. And you just see how heedless we are and how we need to be aware of everything that it is that we do. And then he ends, and this is the very last paragraph, and we began with this on that Friday night. Therefore, this is what is incumbent on the earner, the muktasib, to be cognizant of in his work in respect of what pertains to justice, adl, excellence, ihsan, and shafaqa ala deen, showing concern for his religion, those religious duties to reach the highest degree of closeness to Allah. If he limits himself to observing justice, then he is from the salihin, he's among the righteous. And if he appends excellence to that, he adds to that excellence, then he's among those who are brought near, the muqarrabun. And if in addition to that, he seriously takes into account and attends to the service of the religious life and does those various duties that we've just mentioned, then he shall be among the siddiqun, the truthful. And Allah is most knowing of what is sound. May Allah Ta'ala give us tawfiq and bless us and to benefit us through these radiant and luminous words, and to bless us to be people who understand and who have an ability to put our knowledge into practice in a way that is pleasing to Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. We need ilm knowledge, just as we need amal, and we need action, just as we need ikhlas, sincerity, and then we also need wara', to even be scrupulous in how it is that we sincerely put our knowledge into practice. And then we also need khawf. We still need to have fear, because we don't know if any of that is going to be accepted from us. And this is how we progress through this world and remain in hopes that Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala will have mercy upon our da'f and our weakness, and to show us His ihsan despite our isa'ah and everything that we've done. Ya Arhamur Rahmeen. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq and bless us in all of our affairs. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.
Alhamdulillah, Jazakumullah khairan Sayyidi. There's not much to say, I think, after that session, other than to pray that we are able to internalize and act upon even a portion of what we've heard and what we've read together, inshallah ta'ala. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to really live these meanings after fully understanding them and imbibing them into our hearts. Ameen. At this time, inshallah, we'll take a brief break for 10 minutes prior to returning for our final closing session. We would recommend making wudu if you need to during this time, because Salatul Dhuhr will be immediately after the closing session at 1:30, so a little earlier than it was yesterday. So once again, we'll have until 1 p.m. sharp, at which time the closing session will be initiated by a qasida, and then at 1:30 we'll start the adhan and iqamah for Salatul Dhuhr. So we welcome you all to take this time to freshen up and renew your wudu, inshallah. Barakallahu fikum.